Hey everyone, today on the plastic canvas I'm going to show you how to create an OSL effect. Hey everyone, Matt here from the Plastic Canvas and welcome to today's painting video. And like I said in the intro, today I am going to show you how to create an OSL or object source lighting effect. And if you're not familiar with what that is, you can see it here on the church servant from Bloodborne. It's just painting the glow that's coming off of a light source onto the surrounding surfaces. Now, before we actually do any painting, we need to have a look at the way that light behaves when it hits a surface. So here you can tell from this little building that I'm holding very, very clearly where the light is coming from. It is obviously coming from the right-hand side off the camera because of the way that it's hitting all of these different edges and surfaces. And that directionality of the light is one of the two most important things that we need to consider when creating an OSL effect. You can see just as this chimney comes into view, just all of those right-hand edges of each of those individual stones is what's being hit by the light. And so we need to make sure that when we're painting the correct edges and surfaces to make it look as though the light is actually coming from the correct direction. The other thing that's really, really important to consider is how intense the colouring is on the different surfaces. Because you can see the building that I'm holding off in the distance there is under much, much more dull light than the intense light that the building is that's much, much closer to the light source. And so when we're painting our mini, we need to make sure that the surfaces that are just around the light source are getting hit by a much, much more intense colouring than the surfaces that are just only catching that really, really faint glow off in the distance. Alright, so this OSL effect is going to be built up over several layers, and just to help us keep track of how many layers have been put down so far, just up in the top left-hand corner, there'll be a little counter there just to keep track for us. So this is the first layer that's going down, and for the first couple of layers I'm going to be using amethyst purple, because if you look at the little windows there in the lantern, amethyst purple is kind of the mid-tone colour that's in there. There's far, far brighter colours coming out of there, but amethyst purple will just be a good place to start, because it's still going to give us plenty of room to be able to go lighter and lighter to really build up that intense glow immediately around where that lantern is. So just for these first couple of layers, I'm just using a heavily, heavily thinned down amethyst purple. This would be like 80% water, maybe not quite that, let's just call it 3/4 water, 1/4 paint. Because we're trying to build this up over several layers, I only want each layer just to make a little bit of a difference. And so having it really, really thin down means I have lots and lots of control over how quickly the intensity builds up. So for the first layer that went down, I just put it down anywhere that I thought any amount of light would be hitting. So that first layer is effectively what will be the softest glow coming off this lantern. And then I let that completely dry so that then when the second layer went over the top, it didn't mix at all with the first layer. It just built the opacity anywhere that it went down because now there was 2 layers of paint. So when that second layer went down, I made sure that I reduced the amount of surface area that I was covering, and I reduced it in the direction towards the lantern, so that now there is a slightly more intense glow around the lantern than what there is out on the limit of where that glow is going to be reaching. But what I also did is I just feathered the edges out of that second layer a little bit just to make sure that there was a nice smooth blend from the second layer into the first layer. And here I'm just finishing off the third layer and starting the fourth layer. I am still working with the exact same consistency of paint. I haven't been making it any thicker. It is still just as thin as that very, very first layer, but just each layer, I gradually reduce the amount of surface area that I'm covering so that with every layer, we're just gradually building that opacity. Because if you imagine that 4 layers of the amethyst purple is going to be much, much more intense than just 1 layer. And that's how we start to gradually build up that transition from the softest glow just on the limit of where the light is reaching, right through to that intense glow immediately around the light source where the most intense light is going to be hitting the surfaces. And so now that I've done 4 layers of the amethyst purple, and I'm happy with the intensity that I'm starting to get there, I'm now starting to mix in a little bit of white just to really, really boost how intense that light is immediately around where the lantern is. But you can see I'm still reducing the amount of surface area that I'm covering layer by layer. So layer 5 is going to be covering less area than layer 4 because I want to make sure that some of layer 1, 2, 3, and 4 is all showing so that we get that nice gradual blend from the intense light around the light source, blending out to then where no light is actually reaching at all, and we want to have that nice smooth transition. And you can also see now that I'm up to the 5th layer and I'm starting to mix in the white, I'm really starting to focus more on the edges rather than larger surfaces. So you can see here as I'm working on the bell, I'm really just picking out those edges, but also at the front there where his jacket is open and there's that darker kind of undercloak part just sort of in front of his waist. You can't see it at the moment, but you'll see it in a second as we sort of pan around. Just on that edge, just there next to where those buttons are, when I start to pick out that area, I'm really only just touching that edge that's on the side that's facing the lantern, and I'm just going to be doing it here so you can really see there I'm just picking out that edge just to really make it seem like that edge is just catching that bit more light than the surface as it then curves around and gradually gets less and less light. And so just those little details there, just making sure you're picking out the correct edges, and as you start getting lighter and lighter and lighter with your color, really just focusing on those details, those parts that are going to get just that most amount of light, because that's really going to sell the look that we're going for, that it's the lantern or whatever it is on your Mini that's actually giving off that light, because we want those surfaces immediately around it to get that really, really bright light, but then the surfaces that are further off in the distance to be under more of a dull glow, so that it does actually look like the light is actually dissipating as it gets further away from the light source. So now we're up to layer number 7, so this ends up being the second last layer that I put down, and this is predominantly white at this point. There's very, very little amethyst purple in it now, because I want this to really, really be bright. This is where the brightest, most intense amount of light is just hitting those surfaces immediately around that lantern. And so with just one layer to go of just the straight pure white, our OSL effect is done. So like I said back at the start of the video, those 2 most important things that I think you need to focus on when doing OSL is the directionality, so making sure that you're painting the correct surfaces and edges to make it look as though the light is actually coming from that light source, but then also building up that super, super intense glow immediately around that light source, just to make it look as though the light does dissipate as it gets further and further away from that light source. And so that's it. So if you enjoyed this video and you found it useful, please consider giving the video a thumbs up. And if you haven't hit the subscribe button, please do that as well to stay up to date with future videos as they keep coming out. But until next time, this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas signing out. Happy painting, everyone. Cheers.